Welcome back to Dumber Than a Sack of Hair. I'm your host, Nicole Mann, and I'm here to give you just a little quick true crime update with a dumb crime. This is one of my favorite, what I like to call the Great Feather Heist. This is the story of Edwin Rist. He was a young student in Britain, and he was one that people like to describe as having varying hobbies, and he found a new hobby. That hobby would be fly tying. For those of you who aren't familiar with fishing, bass fishing has you use fishing lures. Many fishing lures use feathers in order to create bright lures. You don't use worms or bait. You just use this feathered fishing lure, and the brightness causes the bass. It lures them on, and the lure is tied around a hook, and the bass go for the lure. And when they go for the lure, obviously they get the hook. So that was his new hobby, and there was one lure in particular that he had yet to tie. The reasoning is that it needed a very specific feather. Now this is the thing, when you tie flies as a hobby, you want them to be accurate, you want them to be dead on, you want them to have exactly what there is, and he wanted this particular lure. You don't use synthetic feathers. So when you're tying these specific lures, you're supposed to be using authentic and real feathers. So this specific lure required dodo feathers. And there were other lures that he couldn't tie because the feathers that they required were from birds that were extinct. So he got this brilliant idea that he had recently been to a natural history museum, and he knew that in a special collections room they had several whole carcasses, the whole pelts of the birds. They just weren't stuffed. If you've ever gone to a natural history museum, they'll have the exhibits of the birds, and in the exhibits of the birds, the birds will be stuffed. Well, when they take the exhibits down and they change them out, what they do is they unstuff the birds, so you'll just have so they can lay them flat, and they can vacuum seal them and put them in drawers. So he knew in these rooms that they had tons of birds and just the full carcasses. So he thought he was going to go and take a look and figure out the security, because he was going to try and steal the birds he needed for the lures. And the particular bird, he needed some dodos, but the particular bird that he wanted for the lure that he was missing were lovely cotingas, a small turquoise bird that also has reddish purple breast plumage. He also found out that they had purple-breasted cotingas and spangled cotingas. Now, they also had dodos, auks. These are all birds that are extinct, okay? So, when he found all this out, he was ecstatic. He was like, yeah, I got this. He was like, this is amazing. And it was actually not that difficult, and he's left in this room alone with all these rare and extinct birds. He's ecstatic, and he's looking around, and there's not really any security, and the reality is he could just crawl out a window. It wouldn't be hard. He decided to come back another day. He snuck in. He literally, just like out of a movie, he got locked in on purpose. And he stuffed his backpack full of these bird carcasses. And legitimately, like in a bad comedy, he actually stuffed a couple down his pants. I am not kidding. He stuffed some down his pants. He crawled out the window and went and caught the train. Can you imagine being that girl on the train when this guy gets on and he goes to sit next to you and you're like, yeah, this seat is taken. He's like, oh, no. It's, and then he literally pulls a bird out of his pants. He's like, nah, that's just a bird in my pants. No, the seat is still definitely taken. Like, what? No, son. Like, you have a backpack full of bird bodies. No, you are not cute. Absolutely not. So he went home and with all his carcasses, and he started tying those flies, and he was so ecstatic. I mean, it is a very tight-knit community. I have a friend who is a bass fisherman, and he doesn't collect the flies, but at one point he did take up fly tying as a hobby. It's very difficult. It's very time consuming. And he said there's a lot of them that he never ever attempts because it is expensive to tie some of these ties. To the members of the community, they only want the finest feathers of the finest species. Many of them are protected, which means it's illegal for you to even get them. And some of them, as in this case, are even extinct. And you have to use, for the biggest, most elusive ties, they have what they call recipes for tying, and you have to stick to those. And if you don't, they won't consider them authentic ties or lures. The issue is he was obsessed with these rare lures and the recipes that required these protected and exotic birds, and that's why he broke in and bought these birds. So he had 37 kingbirds of paradise, 24 magnificent rifle birds, 12 superb birds of paradise, 4 blue birds of paradise, 17 flame bower birds. These are from the Malay archipelago from 150 years earlier. These are all extinct. These are all birds that have value to the scientific community that is beyond measure. You can't even begin to understand that. You really can't measure the worth of what he stole. He stole birds that are extinct, and you can't get that back. And he stole it so that he could use a couple feathers to fly ties. That's ridiculous and insane. So, like I said, he gets out with almost close to 100 bird skins. And immediately he goes and he starts tying these flies, and these people in this community are really impressed. They want to know where he got the stuff. And at first he doesn't want to say anything. He doesn't want to do anything. He's paranoid. He thinks he's going to get caught. He knows the museum has to know what's going on shortly. They don't notice. It's a special collections room. For those of you who don't know how museums, special collection rooms work, a lot of the stuff is locked away. They don't really check on it on a regular basis, so they don't notice immediately. So, he thinks the heat is off for a minute, and he starts to have some money issues at college. What does he do? He starts selling them. He literally starts stripping. He starts stripping, like, remember I told you, these are whole birds that they were taxidermied, okay? And they were just, the stuffing was taken out and they were vacuum sealed. He starts stripping the feathers and putting them in packages of feathers, and he starts selling packs of feathers on eBay. He broke in and stole them, and he's selling the evidence on eBay. Dumber than a sack of feathers, apparently. Because you're selling the evidence on eBay, you moron. But, they still don't know that anything is missing, so nobody knows to be looking on eBay for rare bird feathers. And no, if I see any drag queen comments, no, he was not selling them to drag queens. He was selling them to fly tires. This is just ridiculous. Like, he should be outing himself at the moment, selling all of these feathers online, and eventually someone goes into special collections. It was like 2 years later, somebody goes in and he realizes what happened. It literally took them years to realize what happened, and that's when they find out that on the black market, the reason that they are worried is once they figure out a break-in had happened, they know that Darwin's finches had been sold on the black market. They also had something called Birds of America. It was a very specific special book. It was a rare printing that had been sold for $11.5 million at auction. So they were worried that they decided to do an audit. When they figured out there had been a break-in, they didn't know what had been stolen. So that's why they decided to do a full audit, because they were worried that they did have some extremely, rare things that had been stolen. They were worried that some really rare things had gotten stolen and they weren't aware. So by the time they figured it out, they're like, someone came through here and stole 47 Indian crow skins, 39 resplendent quetzals. How does that even happen? And he knew, just to give you an idea, a full Indian crow skin at that point was being sold for $2,500. So this kid did make bank selling these feathers. He's online on eBay. So it took them a while, but they did the sweep. It took them 34 days to discover on eBay. That's how they found him, on eBay. They discovered finally the sale of the feathers and the skins. And he did make quite a bit of money. He could have made a lot more. He knew that if he sold them at the price that he could have fetched, it would have drawn a lot of heat and people would have started talking about it. So he sold them far under value, and it was insane that he was able to, get away with it. And when they finally caught him and when they finally traced it back to him, the amount of what they were able to get back, they think that roughly 100 of the skins are unaccounted for, meaning whether it's the fact that they were sold, possibly given away, they just don't know where almost 100 of the skins that he sold went to. So they're just unaccounted for. Like, they went through and there's just tons of Ziploc bags filled with feathers, partial skins, some skin. And so imagine being a cop and you have to go and you have to retrieve this, and you're retrieving, bags of feathers, half plucked skins of birds, some completely plucked skins of birds. And like I said, there's a lot of stuff that they have no accounting for it. They don't know who got it. They don't know where it went to. He didn't really keep any kind of records. Like, they just don't know where a lot of stuff is. And when it came to charging him, they didn't really know how to charge him or what they could charge him with, due to the fact that most countries have extensive laws for trafficking in endangered animals and trafficking in the carcasses and the skins, the eggs of endangered animals. There really isn't any penalty for trafficking or selling in extinct animals. So his penalty was fairly light. He didn't really get much of any kind of punishment for what he did. And I think it's because people's hands were tied. Like, they really didn't know what the hell to do, because, what do you do to someone when you don't even have type of law to deal with it? And it's really insane. He ended up really not getting hardly any penalty. Kind of got some like probation and like a little bit of a fine. Like, they really couldn't do anything to him. So, I mean, to me, I feel like that's insane. I think it's the dumbest crime ever. He set himself up to be caught. It took them a little longer than it should have, because it took them a minute to figure out that they'd even been robbed. It took them a couple years to even be able to find him, because where do you look? I mean, obviously they're looking for someone who collects endangered animals or species, or extinct animals or species, something he trophy hunts, but that wasn't even what this was about. This was about a hobby. This was about someone who tied flies. And by the time they got around to that, he had decimated the majority of the collection, and then they didn't even know how to charge him. They didn't even know what to do with him. So, I mean, this is why, to me, this is one of the craziest and dumbest crimes ever. And this goes back to a lot of museum special collections have very little to no security. We keep hearing these stories of heists being held in special collection rooms with people just strong-arming their way in, stealing books. You know, a lot of people don't think about books being worth a lot of money. Books are worth bank. Old books are worth a lot of money. We had a Nancy Drew first edition. My mom sold it at a garage sale. I found out a couple years later that book was worth $5,000. So old books are worth bank, and there have been multiple incidents of people strong-arming their way into special collections and just walking out with books, or people even just walking in, signing in to look at a book and then putting it in a bag and leaving. So the idea of museums and a lot of times libraries have little to no securities in certain places. People are afraid you're going to steal things like moon rocks that have high value. People don't think about things like the carcasses of dodo birds. People don't think about things like books, things that have great value on black markets. Because if you're somebody who comes from big game hunting family, hell yeah, you want a carcass of a dodo bird. You want something that's extinct. It's worth a lot of money on the black market. Maybe not on an open market, but on the black market. So yeah, a lot of these, that's where the dumbness is. And it's dumb on his part. I still can't believe you just walked out with all these skins of all of these birds and thought nobody was ever going to notice and it was never going to get back to you. And then you did the dumbest thing possible. You sold the evidence on eBay. Like, how dumber does it get than that, than selling the evidence on eBay? But then beyond that is the lack of security in probably the most important part of the museum, the place where you keep, you know, the stuff that you're not on display. Like, and it's like I said, it's not just a museum, libraries, it's constant, and people keep hitting these special collection rooms and nobody ever learns from it. They never step up the security, they never make it more difficult, they never limit the access. It just gets worse and worse. So that was just a quick tidbit. That was the story of the Great Feather Heist. Join me next week. We are going to look into the story of we have another Ponzi scheme. This is a little stupider. We're going to look into the story. We're actually going to look into the story of the fake Rockefeller. We'll give you a little bit of rest from Ponzi schemes, but we're going to look into the story of the fake Rockefeller. I find this to be incredibly stupid. I don't understand how everybody was just like, "All right, cool, you Rockefeller." So next week, join me for the story of the fake Rockefeller, because only somebody dumber than a second hair thinks they're going to get away, passing themselves off as one of the richest people in the world. Bye.